Hi. I wanted to talk about the AIDS crisis, its history a little bit. A lot of it is really misunderstood. A lot of the history has been screwed up. A lot of what we think are facts are not. The thing is that those who lived through that era understand it far better than those who did not. Today, there is a bizarre way of young people looking at it. It's like ancient history to them. And today, a lot of people embark in somewhat risky behavior because they think they are impervious to anything, which those of us who grew up through this look at with undisguised horror. I wasn't really aware of the AIDS crisis. It wasn't called the AIDS crisis at the time. Had many different names. One I recall was the gay plague. Um, it was around 1981. I remember that. Around that time, I started seeing friends of mine die. Some very quickly, of all different types of problems. But friends of mine who were in the arts, friends of mine who were performers, friends of mine who were uh, singers, friends of mine were record collectors, friends of mine in every walk of life started to die. Nobody knew what it was. I remember going to visit a friend of mine who was dying of the plague, as they called it. It was very cold all the time, so he had the heat up very high. And I would sit there and just talk with him, hold his hand, give him some dignity, and let them slowly die. I did stay with a few of my friends as they did die. Those are very, very poignant memories, and not really thought of too much today when we talk about the AIDS crisis. We didn't understand it at all, and with the death of Nancy Reagan, I think that she didn't mention it at all. Ronald Reagan didn't really mention it at all. There seemed to be a disconnect between what was happening in the world and what was happening in many people's lives and what was happening in the government. Another thing I remember at the time, as I said, that there was no great name for it. There were terrible jokes that came out about it. I remember one that stated that someone who has this disease, this plague, the only thing they could live on was pizza because that's the only thing you could slide under the door. These were told as funny jokes by people about AIDS. It's really bad. Most recently, Hillary Clinton announced that she wanted to honor Nancy Reagan for her support and work against AIDS. What support? I don't remember anything in 1981, 82, 83, 84. Nothing much of anything from Ronald Reagan. Hillary Clinton just said what she had to say because, well, she doesn't know what she's saying. It's written for her. She just turns colors to match what needs to be said at the moment. The faux princess. That's what politicians are. Fakes. And so she decided to say a fake line to make herself look good. And she made herself look stupid, which is pretty easy to do quite often in her case. She's made a lot of misspeaks. It's interesting. She was the senator from New York for a number of years, and she didn't do anything dealing with gay issues, really. She said a lot, but she just didn't do anything, which is, what can I say? But now she's very strong for everything dealing with these issues, but does that mean anything? Probably not. Joe Biden's the one that pushed for equality in marriage and stuff like that, enforced Obama and Hillary, who all of a sudden was always for it. And it's kind of bizarre to look at it today, to watch all these people say how supportive they were. They weren't in the 1980s. Wasn't much being said at all. And as I said, I watched many friends die. People that went to restaurants who perhaps had the disease were refused service, or if they did serve them, they would, right in front of them after they ate, they would throw the plate, the silverware in the garbage, the drinking glass. Hospitals would put people in separate areas. There was even talk of creating camps to put gay people in, to keep them away from the general public. All of this was being mentioned in the early 1980s. Of course, nobody seems to want to remember that today. So when I think that if we honor those who pass now, who were around during the beginnings of this gay crisis, we should be careful how we honor them, because were they really there? Were they in the forefront? Were they really standing up for anything? And in most cases, it was a definite no. But the history of the AIDS crisis in its beginning is a very sad one, because there was very little recognition, very little work on trying to bring research up. It took a long, long time. In fact, they called it the gay plague, but research really didn't start going until people in the straight community started getting it. And then research got a lot more advanced. I don't care what you are. We're all human. And we all went through a terrible time with the AIDS crisis. It has scarred everyone. We all walk with our scars. I often think of all my friends who died. So many people died. And today, AIDS is somewhat under control. HIV is under control. It's still here. We still have to find ways of eradicating it. There's a lot more work to do. But I think one thing I will mention about the AIDS crisis that perhaps taught us something. We have to always be careful and vigilant, because a virus can cause serious problems in a world in which people can travel all over the world. And that's one of the ways that HIV really started. People were traveling around and passing it around. So I dedicate this little talk on HIV, AIDS, a bit of its history, to my dear friends who left us in the early 1980s, suffering from something we called a plague. And I hope we never have to see something like that again.